Chapter 10. Camp Resources. Construction and crafting supplies. 4 heavy iron bar. 18 medium leather strap. 12 heavy leather strap. 1 leather cord, approximately 10 feet. 5 bronze buckle. 1 canvas patch kit. Needle, thread, 4 canvas patch. 9 rough spun cloth swatch, medium. 5 doeskin patch, medium. 7 rough plank, 6 inches by 2 inches by 4 feet. 4 iron hinge. 16 iron bolt and nut. 1 Timberwolf alpha hide, pour. Armor and clothing. 5 hardened leather bracer. 1 hardened leather vest. 3 woolen padded jacket. 2 woolen fingerless gloves. Weapons. 2 wooden cudgel. 1 really sucky staff. 1 rusty knife, 6 inches. Tools. 2 wrench. 1 iron file. 1 shovel. 1 hatchet. 1 skinning knife. Rations. 6 hardtack. 2 pemmican. 1 rye bread. 1 cask whiskey. 7 cobble root. 22 pucker berries. Miscellaneous. 3 rucksack, small. 2 belt pouch. 2 water skin. 3 bandages, medium. 6 iron chain, assorted lengths. 2 slave collar. 18 chert flakes. 1 caravan lockbox, locked. Mackenzie banished the information screen and instead looked at the piles of resources laid out on the upper edge of the beach. She pulled her fingers through her hair, working out a few of the tangles. It was quite a haul for a group that, a few hours ago, had owned nothing but the clothes they'd arrived in and a couple of makeshift weapons. But the effort to drag everything away from the caravan, following different paths every time to avoid creating trails, had left her quivering with exhaustion. On the bright side, she had gained a couple of points in an attribute called endurance, and a skill point in manual labor. She sat down heavily on a driftwood log. In the back of her mind, she knew she should be leading a discussion about their next steps, but intelligent thought seemed a little beyond her. She hadn't realized she'd zoned out while watching the waves nibble at the shore until the log wiggled under her as Jace took a seat.
Feels like real progress, huh?
He said.
Makes me think we might be okay out here.
She nodded, noticing that River and Seth were separately picking over the collection of supplies, examining the items, then returning them to the piles. Seth seemed particularly interested in the Timberwolf alpha hide, running his hand over the pelt and fingering the raw edges where Mackenzie had made something of a massacre of the skinning process. Unlike the other loot items that had been spawned by simply plucking at the corpse to cause disintegration, removing the hide from the beast had taken actual work with the skinning knife she'd found in one of the wagons. Due to the size of the beast, she'd gained 2 points in skinning before she'd finally pulled the hide free, and she'd also unlocked the tanning trade. But it had been something of a gory process. Honestly, she wasn't keen to advance that profession if she didn't have to. Mackenzie laid a hand on the belt pouch she'd taken for herself, a rugged leather container with loops she'd used to attach it to her flimsy cloth belt. Inside were 2 Timberwolf alpha fangs, a rose glass bauble, 22 mule tail hairs, and 3 steel fishing lures with hooks. The description had listed everything but the lures as crafting components, so she didn't feel bad reserving them for herself. The fishing lures she planned to share with the group, possibly with a few tail hairs to use as line. She just hadn't wanted them to get lost amongst the larger supplies. "How's your leg?" she asked, glancing down at his torn trousers and the clean bandage that showed through the rips. After their first staggering trip back with the loot they'd gathered, River's healer instincts had surfaced. She'd insisted that Jace let her tend the wound. After her experience with the shaman's match, Mackenzie hadn't been too shocked when a faint tendril of healing energy had flowed from the young woman's hands and over Jace's legs, stopping the bleeding but not closing the wound. According to River, she'd learned a once-a-day staunch bleeding spell and had received a quest to learn the medicinal properties of a few local plants.
It doesn't hurt too badly. Health is still down a few points, though.
I guess we'll have to see what happens when you rest. That's when some games restore hit points. If not then, I guess we'll have to hope we find a way to increase River's healing, or we'll have to be really careful about injuries.
What do you think about the location those guys found?
Jace asked. Though still exhausted from their ordeal, Seth and River had helped out by foraging for more cobble roots and exploring their area, while Mackenzie and Jace had made the trips to ferry supplies. Following Jace's suggestion, they'd targeted their efforts toward the north, away from the location of the cavern, and toward the freshwater stream he'd crossed shortly before Mackenzie had appeared. They'd found what appeared to be the ruins of a small village or farmstead overlooking the stream. The wooden walls had long since decayed, but the foundations and portions of the chimneys were largely intact. Given what happened to them with the slavers, not to mention what they overheard from their captors about banditry and attacks by mercenaries, I think we should make defenses a priority.
Agreed.
He said with a nod.
Though we should make sure we consider all our options. We could head inland, toward the mountains. The risk of staying near the shore is that it also puts us near the road.
But we don't know if there are other, more crowded roads farther from the shore. He tapped his long fingers on the knee of his trousers while he thought.
True. And it sounds like whatever this winter's breath is, it's more common deeper into the woods. I think I'd rather deal with humans because at least then there's the chance we could bargain or reason with them if we can't beat them outright.
Mackenzie stretched out a leg, her muscles protesting. During the afternoon hours, the clouds had flowed back inland from a massive bank that had lingered over the ocean all day. Though it didn't look like rain, not yet, the damp air seemed to sink through her flesh and into her bones. By her best guess, dusk would fall over the land in an hour or so. I'd say the sooner we put added distance between us and the caravan, the better. But honestly, I don't think I could carry a single leather strap to the new spot. Not without some rest. In fact, as she said that, a bar briefly showed in her vision. Her fatigue was hovering around 90%.
No argument for me on waiting until morning. I think we were careful enough in our takings to avoid immediate suspicion. The wolf carcasses and human bodies we left ought to be enough explanation for anyone that happens on the scene.
The planks were the biggest risk. They'd dismantled 2 of the wagon tailgates for materials, thinking they might not be missed. But despite how useful it might have been to take more wood for construction, or wheels to help carry their new crap around, they'd left the wagons largely intact. But worth it.
Totally agreed.
Jace held out a fist, which she bumped with her knuckles. With a yawn, Mackenzie tugged open her belt pouch and removed a fishing lure and a pair of long horsehairs. So you're a big outdoorsman, right? Think you can catch me some fish for dinner? Jace laughed.
Maybe. But only if you use your fancy magic to make a fire. I'm dying for another hot meal.
At the upper edge of the beach, Mackenzie sat before a driftwood fire she'd kindled with another shaman's match, wowing the newcomers and gaining a skill point in totems and charms. Around her, gloom was descending, but the flames burned hungrily, eating through the sun-bleached wood with hardly a curl of smoke or pop of sap. Between the heat on her face and the knowledge that friends were near, she almost felt comfortable. While watching the blaze, she switched between creating items from her known recipes, shaman's matches and stone bond charms, and experimenting with the other components she'd collected. So far, she'd created 4 each of the familiar items, but hadn't received another skill up. The experiments hadn't yielded anything yet, though she had encountered what seemed to be a skill or level restriction. Whenever she tried to loop a noose of horsehair around a Timberwolf alpha fang, the tooth kept slipping out of her fingers. It didn't seem to matter how hard she concentrated. as soon as she tried to snag the fang with the hair, it just fell out of her grip. Annoying, but it also made her think she might be on the right track to discovering a recipe. She just needed a higher skill. Setting aside her recently completed stone bond charm, she sighed contentedly and glanced around. Jace was a shadow down by the breaking waves, twitching his arm now and again in an attempt to entice fish toward the lure and hook on the end of his makeshift line. The hook was baited with a slug-like creature. River had found a small herd of them squirming on the underside of a large beach cobble. To Mac, they hadn't looked that appetizing, but then again, she wasn't a fish. She glanced across the fire at the young woman. During the last hours of daylight, River had scoured the nearby forest and shoreline for a variety of plants, and she was now sorting through them, testing their juice on the skin on the inside of her wrists and elbows. If that didn't burn, she squeezed a drop onto her finger, then touched it to her tongue. Those that didn't numb or burn her mouth were set aside for further investigation as potential herbal medicines. As for Seth, the teenager had recovered from his friendliness after learning Mackenzie was a game tester. Once again sulking, he'd wandered off maybe half an hour ago, carrying a few of the leather straps. After eating a small meal of roasted cobble roots, he'd claimed that he wanted to get a head start on the relocation. Of course, moving 5 or 6 leather straps was hardly much of a start, but no one mentioned that. Seth probably just needed some alone time, and Mackenzie was kind of relieved to be free of his emo presence for a while. Seth said you were an unschooler? What does that mean? Mackenzie asked as she picked up a couple of driftwood twigs and held them at an angle to one another, trying to imagine ways to bind them together that might result in a new recipe. River snorted.
I never should have said anything about it. It's like my upbringing offended him or something, and he just won't let it drop. Anyway, it was kind of like homeschooling, except my parents didn't push any particular curriculum. It wasn't like I didn't learn to read and do math. They just waited until I asked.
She shrugged.
I always wanted to be in a real school rather than hanging out with people we met on the road. My parents and brother and I lived in an old school bus converted into an RV. But I guess school is miserable for some people too.
So you were always traveling? What did your parents do for work?
Whatever they could find, really. We stayed on a lot of organic farms and stuff, helping out with the harvest for a little cash and food. We also didn't need much. Just gas money and a little bit of cash for essentials. We wore clothes from thrift shops. Sometimes from the dumpsters out behind thrift shops, since they usually get more donations than they can handle. But Mom and Dad always got me good hiking shoes. Said we should take care of our feet since we only get one pair.
The young woman glanced up, a shy expression on her face.
Sorry. TMI, I'm sure.
Mackenzie shook her head. No, it's interesting. So you spend a lot of time hiking, I guess.
Yeah, lots of exploring. My mom was pretty into making herbal medicine, so that's making this easier.
She gestured toward the array of plants spread on the log before her. Mackenzie glanced toward the pile of resources. You didn't happen to learn how to, I don't know, tan hides or make leather or whatever? River grimaced.
Enough to know it's not very fun.
Oh!
A sudden yelp from Jace brought Mackenzie bolt upright, and she was on her feet with the newly recovered really sucky staff in her hand no more than a second later. Her thudding heart slowed when the next sound from the shoreline was a delighted laugh. A few seconds later, Jace stepped into the firelight, proudly holding a fishing line with a very small fish wriggling on the end. Mackenzie joined in his laughter. No way! I can't believe you caught something.
Not only that, but I think it might be a large enough snack for a house cat.
A very dainty house cat, maybe. But we gotta start somewhere, right? And half an hour later, the three of them were huddled around a flat stone where the tiny morsel was laid out and steaming. The skin was charred in a few places, but Mackenzie wouldn't have cared if the flesh had been black all the way through. She was salivating so hard her jaw ached. "What do you guys think?" she said. "Do we wait for Seth?" River snorted.
He's taken 2 hours to walk half a mile and back. I'm pretty sure whatever he's up to, he's not thinking too hard about making us happy. I say we save him a bite, and if it seems like he won't be back before we turn in, we might as well eat that too so as not to attract scavengers.
I like your logic.
Jace said.
No offense to Seth, but I'm starving.
Mackenzie didn't even bother to speak. She just dug in, pulling delicate flakes of fish off the bones. As she tucked the first bite into her mouth, she thought she spied motion at the edge of the firelight. Straining her eyes, she peered harder, suddenly afraid that Seth had been listening in. But after a few seconds, she hadn't spotted anything else. It had probably been her imagination. Anyway, the fish was disappearing fast. She needed to focus on eating if she was going to get her fair share. Chapter 11. Drizzle shrouded the landscape with mist, making it seem as if their small camp was the only place left in the world. Standing over the pile of supplies, Jace rolled his shoulders to work out the stiffness from yesterday's efforts. He then ran a hand over his injured thigh, gently probing the tender spots. According to his health bar, he'd regained around half of the points he'd lost the day before. But it seemed that Mackenzie's hope of full healing after a long rest wasn't going to come true. Still, he felt stronger today, and his clothes even seemed to fit a little more tightly. It was almost as if his body had grown into the increased strength that had been reported by the notifications. As the stiffness melted from his muscles, he yawned, enjoying the feeling of having worked hard. Back in his old life, long days in the mountains had always left him feeling invigorated once he'd slept off the fatigue. And he would need that energy today. Relocating the supplies would probably take most of the daylight hours. No thanks to Seth, of course. Despite pushing his way into the shelter long after full night had fallen, it seemed that he hadn't moved anything beyond the initial load he'd taken off with early in the evening. That was okay, honestly. Even though Jace thought the description of the new location sounded promising, he wanted to see it himself before committing to the move. Since the others were still snoring away, it seemed he'd have the time to evaluate things without distraction. Rooting through the piles of supplies, he came up with a rucksack, water skin, a bar of pemmican, and the rusty knife. He stuck the knife through his belt where he could grab it with his offhand, and the rest went into the pack and onto his back. As he slipped the straps over his shoulders, an inventory screen appeared at the edge of his vision, translucent until he focused on it. The stored items occupied around 1/4 of the available slots, which would give him space to carry anything he might scavenge during his explorations. Nodding to himself, he hefted his hammer, leaving the pry bar behind for the others, and started down the beach toward the fresh water stream and the location of this supposed set of ruins. The sound of the waves lulled him into an easy walking rhythm. Jace inhaled deeply. Less than 2 days ago, he'd been alone and hungry, lost and numb after hours of fear. Now he had supplies, weapons, and friends. Of course, he still wanted answers for why this had happened, but he could see his way to accepting his situation regardless. Closer to the area of the shore where the fresh water stream cut across the beach, the rocks grew more jagged and larger, forming tide pools where he spied anemones and urchin-like creatures, bright patches of color in the still water. A couple of small fish darted out of sight when he stepped close to one of the pools. He thought about the horsehair fishing line and steel lure wrapped around his belt. Last night's catch might have been pure luck, but now he had 3 points in fishing, so he assumed it would only get easier. In a spot like this, where the waves spent their energy against offshore rocks before swirling farther ashore, he wouldn't have to worry so much about the pull of the water stealing his bait or lure. Together with the ready supply of fresh water, the location was starting to feel promising. The drizzle had stopped, and the fog was starting to lift when he reached the stream. The water flowed over benches of stone to join the sea, gurgling quietly against the hiss of the waves. Before turning for the woods, Jace crouched and splashed cool liquid over his face, blinking away the sting of old sweat that washed down his face. He unstoppered the water skin, poured out the stale liquid, and filled the bladder to bursting with clean water. After drinking his fill from cupped hands, he stood and headed for the trees. Just inside the line of scraggly pines, the ground sloped sharply upward before reaching a short vertical step, maybe 10 or 12 feet of sheer gray limestone. The bluff loomed over one edge of the creek bed. The bank on that side quickly narrowed until there was no flat ground between the water and the small cliff. Traveling away from where it abutted the creek, the rise stretched through the forest, parallel to the shore, before dropping off after perhaps 50 yards. To Jace, the rock looked solid enough to climb, but a better means of access was a narrow ledge that cut across the face leading from the forest floor to the top of the bluff. The ledge seemed sturdy enough, but after years spent rescuing injured hikers who had believed the same thing, he proceeded carefully, using solution pockets in the vertical wall as handholds as he moved upward, testing each step before committing his weight. You have gained a skill point. +1 climbing. You have gained an attribute point. +1 agility. When he reached the top of the bluff, Jace blinked in surprise. River and Seth had mentioned the ruined buildings, but Jace had expected something similar to the tumble-down old mining settlements that scattered the American West. A partial chimney here and there, splintered logs and rough-hewn planks collapsed onto foundations of dry stacked stones laid no more than a foot or two below the level of the topsoil. This was much more extensive. From below, the top of the bluff had appeared forested, cloaked with a sparse growth of pines and evergreen bushes. But that had been an illusion. Perhaps an intentional one. Now that he stood atop the bluff, he could see the plan. Near the cliff's edge, trees and low brush had been left to grow unhindered, creating a sort of screen. But in the center of the high ground, an area perhaps 50 yards by twice that in the other direction, the large trees had been harvested long ago. Jace even spied a few of their stumps, the wood gray and disintegrating. Since the settlement's abandonment, a few saplings had sprung up, bursting out between the cobblestones of the paths that crisscrossed the ruin and, in a few cases, rising where floorboards had long since decayed into soil. A thicket of some sort of berry bush, not puckerberries, but maybe something more palatable, grew within the outline of one of the stone-walled buildings, and low-growing brush crowded against the base of most of the crumbling walls. Nonetheless, the area was open to the sky while sheltered from sight by the bluff's high ground and the screening effect of the surrounding foliage. Points 3, 4, and 5 in favor of the location: access to sunlight for crops, defensible high ground, natural concealment. And, of course, there was the abundant supply of building materials in the form of square-cut foundation stones and a head start on primitive shelters provided by the scattered walls that still stood. They could even build near one of the existing hearths and fireplaces so that they wouldn't have to worry so much about wind or rain putting out their fires. Jace moved deeper into the settlement, his boots thumping on the mossy stones of the pathways. He made a quick survey, counting around 10 or 12 foundations, some supporting walls between knee and shoulder height. A stone fence, still mostly intact, created what appeared to be a corral for livestock, complete with an opening that must have supported a gate at one point. The little icon he now associated with his sense treasure ability appeared in his vision. Jace almost thumped his forehead, wondering why he hadn't thought of that first thing. When he gave the image a mental acknowledgement, the icon flashed and vanished. In its place, regions of the settlement lit up with the subtle glow that indicated nearby loot. Jace hardly knew where to focus first. He also realized that he ought to get back since the others would be waking soon. But he was beginning to understand why Mackenzie was so envious of his ability. Before doing anything else, he wanted to turn over every glowing stone and seek out each hidden niche. He forced himself to settle on a single glow that emanated from the far side of a nearby chimney. As he rounded the column of neatly mortared stone and stepped over the remnants of a wall, his eyes widened. Set upon a heavy stone block and somewhat sheltered by the boughs of a small pine tree, the anvil had seen better days. Flowers of rust covered the surface, pitting the metal in places. But given the level of deterioration in the rest of the settlement, it seemed remarkable that the massive hunk of iron hadn't been reduced to something resembling Swiss cheese. Jace edged closer and ran a finger through the rust. You have discovered Gardo's anvil. A master smith, Gardo Blacktooth, commissioned this anvil from a forge far inland, beyond the Cragscales and the Grass King's domain. The forge master claimed to know a secret alloy that would render the anvil indestructible. Furthermore, she claimed that blades crafted upon its surface by the hands of a skilled blacksmith would often take on natural enhancements and could even earn masterwork status. It is not known whether Gardo succeeded in crafting a masterwork blade before he, along with his fellow villagers, vanished during the 6th Cragscale War. Requirements for crafting enchanted weapons. Tier 3 weaponsmithing. Tier 2 bladesmithing. Requirements for crafting masterwork weapons. Unknown. Quest updated. Weapon Seeker Part 2. Perhaps your ultimate weapon bond will come through a blade that you form with your own hands. Bonus objective. Further your journey as a weaponsmith, gaining the skills necessary to fashion enchanted weapons upon Gardo's anvil. Jace slowly withdrew his hand from the anvil and took a reverent step away. He tried to imagine the man who had once used the anvil as part of his work in the smithy. Had he been a blacksmith by choice? By necessity? Had these Cragscale wars forced him from a life of working iron into horseshoes and plows to an existence focused around weapons? How long ago had he lived? Thoughts on the vanished smith. Jace once again headed toward the center of the abandoned settlement, where the cobblestone path widened into a small square. He moved to the center of the open area, kicking aside twigs and pine cones deposited, most likely by recent storm winds. Standing in the middle of the square, he turned a slow circle, then jerked in surprise when a large pop-up appeared. Settlement is unclaimed. Ironstead. Village. Ruined 90%. Deserted since some time during the 6th Cragscale War, Ironstead was once home to a small but thriving community of artisans, fishermen, and shepherds. Resources: fresh water, abundant. Timber, abundant. Fishery, moderate. Arable land, fair. Do you wish to claim Ironstead as your home base, assuming management and leadership duties? Yes or no? Jace hesitated, hovering his awareness over the prompt. As far as base camps went, the ruined settlement seemed almost perfect. He hadn't yet checked the distance from the road. Ideally, they would be far enough to avoid easy notice, but close enough to access the track if and when they wanted to travel. Even if the distance weren't quite right, the high ground and concealing foliage provided protective bonuses that he doubted they'd find elsewhere. Plus, with the availability of stone blocks, they could even consider building a wall to bolster their defenses. That just left the question of whether or not it should be him that claimed the settlement and accepted leadership. Jace ran a hand over the stubble of his beard. Maybe it wasn't even a choice. Earlier, the system had nominated him as the authority over the camp resources, even though Mackenzie had far more experience with games. He also wasn't the first from their group to visit Ironstead, yet neither River nor Seth had received the message. So, yeah, for whatever reason, it seemed the system had chosen him as the de facto leader of their small party. He might as well lead then. Before he could come up with reasons to doubt his choice, Jace focused on the prompt and gave the yes option a mental click. Ironstead is now under your control. Okay then. Seemed the question of whether or not to relocate the camp was settled. Shouldering his pack, Jace gave the settlement one last glance and then started for the ledge leading off the bluff. As he strode forward, he did his best to ignore the glowing areas scattering the ruins, figuring he'd have plenty of time to explore the village once they were settled in. But one particular source of illumination captured his attention. Tucked into the inside corner of one of the ruined buildings, a dark hole opened into the ground. Brush screened most of the opening, but as Jace moved closer, the glow gained sharp edges, outlining what appeared to be a square opening in the slate flagstones of the floor. A set of steps descended into the shadow. Looking closer, he saw that the top 2 stairs had been formed by mortaring stones in place, but below that, the staircase had been carved directly from the limestone of the bluff. As he craned his neck in an attempt to see farther, perhaps to locate the treasure indicated by his ability, a notification appeared. You can sense that something valuable lies below, perhaps many valuable items. You also sense that you lack the skill to locate these items. Sorry, sucker. Well, that was kind of a bummer. But at least he'd have a lot of glowing stuff to investigate once they returned. Maybe the searching process would gain him the skill he needed to locate whatever treasure lay beneath the town. Regardless, it was definitely time to get back. Straightening, Jace headed for the path and made his way back out to the beach. Filling his nostrils with the fresh sea air, he turned for the temporary camp, excited to get this relocation completed. Chapter 12. Something was moving through the woods. Jace knew it subconsciously at first, and by the time the realization wormed its way out to his thinking mind, he'd marked the motion as deliberate, furtive. Whatever creature lurked in the shadows of the pines, darting from darkened copse to thick stand of brush, it was following him. He stopped and turned to face the sea, exposing his back, but only for long enough to convince the stalker that he was unaware of the pursuit. After that, he stretched and passed the blacksmith's hammer back and forth between his hands as if idly pondering something, but really giving himself a chance to limber his fingers and wrists. Yawning, he returned to his journey along the shore, but slowed his pace, glancing around at the beach as if enjoying the morning or watching for scuttling crabs. Twice, his eyes passed over the line of trees, but he couldn't make out any forms. His stalker was well hidden.
Think, Jace.
The first question was whether his pursuer was animal or human. The more he considered it, the more certain he was that this was no wolf or wildcat on his tail. A mountain lion might indeed stalk her prey for a time, but the motion would be different. Cats crept along on their belly, low to the ground. A lone wolf, separated from his pack after the fight at the caravan, might also take up pursuit, shadowing Jace's movements until the time was right for a sudden rush. But neither of those animals would dart from tree to tree. As far as he knew, that was distinctly human behavior. Humanoid, anyway. So the next question was, why? Jace didn't have anything worth robbing, which probably ruled out bandits. It certainly didn't rule out slavers, though. Of course, the stalker could be a local, too. Someone worried about a group of outsiders moving in on their fishing grounds. Or they could be curious. Another castaway, even. He couldn't figure out anything for certain, but he did know that he couldn't just keep walking along the beach because that would lead the stalker and any friends the stalker might have straight to the unsuspecting people back at the old camp. He stopped and turned to face the forest and drew the rusty knife with his offhand.
I know you're there,
he shouted, loud enough to be heard over the waves. Jace waited. Nothing happened, so he advanced toward the trees, wishing he'd at least tried on the hardened leather vest they'd looted from the caravan.
Yo!
He called.
We can play games, or you can just come out. I'd rather keep things peaceable, but if you intend to fight me, let's start this thing.
At first, he thought the hiss was another wave retreating from the shore, but it went on too long and ended in a keening whine. Jace peered, struggling to see through the screen of branches. Though the fog had lifted, a thick cloud layer draped the coast, damping the light to a dull gray. In the shade of the trees, it was hard to distinguish bushes from a more solid form. But then one of the dark masses moved, and he made out the smooth dome of what appeared to be a head, followed by a pair of narrow shoulders, one hanging lower than the other. A strange, pale white creature limped from the trees, one knobby-fingered hand clutching the elbow of an injured arm. By Jace's best guess, the creature had a dislocated shoulder along with the deep gashes. Some looked nearly to the bone, that raked its bicep area. Large eyes loomed over a small jaw and pointy nose. Whether due to the injury or the creature's natural condition, the milky flesh of its face had no color variation, not even in its lips. Tiny ears were scarcely visible on the side of its head, and a tank-top-style tunic hung off the bony shoulders, large armpit holes exposing ribs that stood from its flesh like the bars on the grill of a truck. Knock-kneed, it limped closer, large sandaled feet shuffling out of the carpet of needles and onto the beach cobbles. As it stepped fully into the light, Jace judged the creature to be around 4 feet tall. It made another hiss-whine noise, bearing widely spaced teeth that were pointier than a human's, but nothing like an animal's fangs. Jace noticed now that the creature's irises were a deep gray fading to a ring of navy blue around the rim. Slowly, he slid the knife back into his belt, then raised his free hand in what he hoped was a peaceful gesture. He was no longer scared, but he'd dealt with enough injured humans and animals in his life to know they startled easily.
You're the prisoner River and Seth mentioned, right? They said you were called a skulk. We saw the blood in your cage. Thought the wolves got you.
The creature stared at him pitiably. Jace felt frozen, unsure what else to do, until he remembered what Mackenzie had said about examining the slavers. When confronted with the Timberwolf Alpha, he hadn't done anything consciously to bring up the window with information on the wolf. Maybe that had been something of a need-to-know situation. Now, he wanted to get the same information on demand. Focusing his intent on the creature, he tried to do as Mackenzie had described and will the pop-up to appear. A split second later, he was rewarded with a billboard in his vision. Gristui, Level 5. Alignment, Neutral, Moral. Gristui is a member of a secretive race called Skulks by humans of the Rhymeshore region. Skulks are known for their cleverness in achieving their aims, whether those be the freeing of their kin from the menageries of traveling entertainers or the construction of their hidden warrens of tunnels, often discovered to have existed beneath the cellars of human settlements for decades. Health, 35 out of 72. Additional information may be available through the combat assessment skill, though detailed reports on capabilities and weaknesses are only delivered at higher tiers of this skill. Okay, whatever. He didn't need to know about the creature's weaknesses at the moment, since the broken shoulder was a pretty big clue.
Your name is Gritsui? Am I saying that right?
The skulk blinked as if surprised to hear its name. Seemed that even if Jace had massacred the pronunciation, he'd gotten something right. Again, the creature's colorless lips drew back from its teeth as it hissed in response. Jace couldn't make out syllables, much less words. Lowering his hammer, but keeping a solid grip on it, he took a slow step forward. He gestured toward the skulk's injured arm.
I have a friend who might be able to help you. She's been trying to make medicine from the plants around here. Even if she hasn't found anything to heal your cuts, I bet she can help put your shoulder back in place.
Of course, he had no clue whether the creature understood a word he was saying, but when he gestured down the beach, Gristui followed the motion and peered along the coast. After a moment, it met his eyes, then nodded.
Okay then,
Jace said.
Back to camp it is. Do you need... Is there any way I can help?
He held out his elbow as a makeshift crutch. Gristouille gave a small shake of its head, then started walking in the direction Jace had been traveling. He seemed to be favoring his right foot, but there was no visible injury to the limb. Still, progress seemed painful, and Jace was surprised the skulk had kept up with him while hurrying from shadow to shadow. He must have been fairly desperate to push himself so hard.
By the look of your ribs, I'm guessing you were captured far from here and transported without a lot of meals.
Jace said.
Must have been a long journey in that cage.
Mentioning the cage out loud made him think about it more carefully. Why had the slavers used the cage for the skulk, but used collars on Seth and River? Had they considered Gristouille more dangerous? More valuable? And given the creature's emaciated condition, how had he fought off one or more wolves, possibly including the timber wolf Alpha? Jace liked to think the best of people, and intelligent humanoids, apparently. But he had encountered enough wackos and criminals in his life that he didn't think of himself as too trusting either. Unless they could figure out a way to communicate well enough with Gristouille to get his full story, and maybe not even then, Jace intended to keep a very close eye on the skulk. A very close eye indeed. Chapter 13. Oh! Mackenzie gave a startled little yelp when she came out of the forest and spotted Jace and Gristouille making the final limping steps to reach the piles of supplies on the beach. She stood blinking for a moment, the stalks of maybe a dozen cobble roots clutched in her fist, then crouched by a low burning driftwood fire and laid the roots onto the coals. "I see you made a friend," she said as she stood. Jace smirked.
And I see I'm getting some competition as head chef for our little party.
He gestured to the skulk.
This is Gristouille. I don't think he speaks English, but he seems to understand a little. Or at least he can get the gist of something with enough sign language.
I see. And where did you guys meet? Pick up basketball game or something? Gristouille's large eyes swiveled back and forth between them, and then he let out a small hiss whine. This time, Jace almost thought he could pick out a few distinct sounds.
He dunks like a madman. Hard to believe, huh? Anyway, I was hoping River could relocate his shoulder and maybe bandage the gashes.
A clatter of sticks announced River's arrival as she dropped the firewood she'd collected and rushed over.
Ugh, the poor guy!
She said, before glaring at Jace and Mackenzie in turn.
I thought you guys said the wolves got him!
When the skulk and River locked eyes, there seemed to be a moment of mutual recognition. Gristouille and the young people had shared an experience that Jace and Mackenzie hadn't, and it was obvious in the skulk's body language. He seemed both ashamed to have been a captive and relieved to be with others who had experienced the same thing. When River cupped a hand under the skulk's bony elbow, the creature winced and curled his fingers tighter around his upper arm. River's eyes went distant as she gently ran the fingers of her other hand near the white flesh. A faint curl of light spread from her palm and sank into the gouges on the creature's arm. The edges of the wounds pulled slightly closer together, but didn't close. Moving on from the gashes, River focused her attention on the collapsed joint. Her eyebrows drew together.
I haven't ever done this. I saw a relocation performed once, but...
She shrugged.
Before trying anything, I'd like to bandage the wounds to preserve that healing. I have a theory about pain-killing properties from a plant I found. Hate to experiment on a patient who doesn't understand me, though.
Gristouille had accepted the young woman's examination without protest, but the tension in his body betrayed his nervousness. The muscles of his injured arm stood out beneath the skin. Still, he didn't try to pull away. The moment River had spoken of bandaging, Mackenzie had started rooting through the pile of supplies, and now she came back with a roll of cloth. Gristouille cast a nervous glance at the bandage, then clamped his eyes shut in an almost cute imitation of a child at a doctor's office.
Okay, here goes.
River said in a calming voice that Jace recognized from her efforts to tend the wounds on his leg. Her efforts there had earned her a point in bandaging and another in healing, non-magical. He hoped that would make the process even easier on Gristui. The skulk hissed, curling his toes when River gently nudged his uninjured hand away from his arm. But he let go after a moment and balled his fingers into a fist instead. When the young woman finished wrapping the bandage around the creature's skinny arm and snugged the dressing, Gristui gave a keening whine. But after a moment, he swallowed and opened his eyes to examine the bandage.
Help him sit.
River said as she turned for the forest and their basic wilderness shelter.
I'm going to get the night vines I collected.
Gristui hissed and made a couple clicking sounds when Jace gestured toward a large driftwood log. This time, Jace was certain he picked up some distinct sounds, and they almost sounded intelligible. You have gained a skill point. +1 foreign language learning. You have gained a skill point. +1 skulk language. Congratulations! By discovering 2 skills within the communications domain, you may now view all the Tier 1 skills in this domain. As before, points will only be awarded by discovering and performing actions that utilize the individual skills.
You get that?
He asked Mackenzie. She nodded, but her eyes were distant as if she were still reading information. I've been checking out the skill trees and domains, the ones I have access to. It's pretty insane. Jace nodded. The skill domains were something he needed to learn about as well, but at the moment he was more interested in getting to the point where he could understand what Gristui was saying.
Gristui,
he said.
If you can understand me, keep talking.
As the skulk took a seat on the log, he met Jace's eyes and hiss-whined again.
Gristui.
You have gained a skill point. +1 skulk language.
Whoa,
Jace said.
I understood you. And I'm sorry. I was saying your name wrong.
He'd been putting too much buzz into the Z sound and hadn't been drawing out the E at the end enough. He tried again, focusing on getting the sounds right. In response, the skulk nodded. When River returned, she held a flat piece of driftwood with what appeared to be mashed-up plant pulp on top. Gristui gave the mash a skeptical look and leaned forward to sniff it. But he quickly blinked and nodded, his face softening in mild relief. I think he recognizes it, Mackenzie said. River nodded.
Yep, system just confirmed it. My confidence rating in the pain-killing properties went up to 90%. I guess I can gain knowledge from others.
Without hesitation, Gristui dragged a pair of fingers through the mash and then sucked it off. Just a second or two later, more of the tension left his body. Only the muscles of his dislocated shoulder remained clenched.
This is still going to suck,
River said.
I hear it's miserable. You guys hold him?
The skulk's skin was surprisingly cold, almost like a reptile's. Once both Mackenzie and Jace had a grip on the slight creature, River nodded and grabbed his arm. She raised the elbow out from his ribs and began to twist. Gristui's eyes went wide, and he started to flail. The little bugger was surprisingly strong, and Jace almost lost his grip on the skulk's ankles. You have gained a skill point. +1 grapple.
Ow! Shit, dude!
Gristui wheezed. Jace clearly heard the English words even though the skulk had spoken in his own tongue. It was as if the translation overlaid the other speech. You have gained a skill point. +1 skulk language. And then it was over, the head of the arm bone popping back into the shoulder socket. Gristui sagged and swayed and would have fallen off the log if Mackenzie hadn't been behind him, ready to offer support.
New ability,
River said.
Set bone. A non-magical version. It says it works for dislocations and breaks. So I guess that will be easier next time.
After assuring that the skulk had regained his balance, Mackenzie stood tall and gave River a crooked smile. You wanted to be a nurse, right? Because it's pretty clear the system has put you in the healer role, just like it made Jace the tank and me the shaman type. River shrugged.
I suppose I'm happy however I can help.
What do you figure Seth is supposed to be?
Jace asked. He hadn't seen the kid since returning, so he assumed the teenager was still sleeping after his late night. River seemed on the verge of saying something, but cut herself off. It probably hadn't been a very flattering comment. Anyway, Mackenzie said, I figured you were checking out the potential camp. At the mention, Jace's excitement came rushing back.
Yes, actually.
And?
Seriously, these guys understated how perfect it is. What do you say we help Gristui get comfortable while he recovers from his ordeal? I can't wait to start moving our stuff.
Jace could hear the others discussing sleeping arrangements as he faced the crumbling wall where his sense treasure ability indicated that another item could be found. In the fading light of dusk, it was hard to make out the edges of the loose block, but the faint outlining from his treasure hunting ability helped him find a chink for the pry bar. With a grunt, he braced his shoulder against the stone wall and put his weight into the bar. The block wiggled, then suddenly popped free, tumbling into the weeds at the base of the wall. Jace peered inside the hole and pulled out what appeared to be a roll of thick leather. You have gained Mastery in Treasure Sense, Tier 1, plus 5% Mastery, 10% total. You have received Stone Napper's Kit. Once the prized possession of an Ironstead stoneworker, this kit must have been hidden in the wall shortly before the settlement was abandoned. You have uncovered a trade, stoneworking. From the fashioning of blades and scrapers from flint and chert, to the hewing of blocks for construction, to the sculpting of valuable works of art, stoneworkers always add value to the settlements where they ply their trade. After reaching basic competency in the trade's foundational skills, stone knapping, stone cutting, basic masonry, most stoneworkers choose a specialty on which to focus. A few, however, find great satisfaction in advancing all aspects. Related trades and skills: sculpting, stone, construction, basic, masterwork. Complementary trades and skills: quarrying, mortar creation. Jace's eyebrows went up. So far, every glowing treasure he'd found had been useful, and this was no exception. Jamming the pry bar through his belt, he unrolled the leather and examined its contents. Inside was another patch of thick hide, smaller than the outer roll, a set of what appeared to be antler tines, smoothed and worked into various points, and a few larger beech cobbles. Having watched some of the interpretive sessions in Yosemite Valley, he knew that some of the tools were for percussion flaking of stone blades, and some were for fine pressure flaking when working on delicate points, such as arrowheads. Of course, understanding the purpose of the tools and actually using them were different matters, but he found he was already looking forward to trying. While commuting from the old camp to Ironstead, he'd noticed that the limestone escarpment where the town perched was a source of the chert nodules. Rolling the kit back up, he started back toward the group. After relocating the supplies from the old camp, stacking most in sorted piles in the center of town, they'd thrown together a hasty shelter in one of the ruined buildings by bridging a corner where two chest-high walls met with the rough planks from the caravan. Mackenzie had brought armfuls of driftwood up from the beach, and as Jace had searched the town, gathering items indicated by his treasure sense, she had set to laying and kindling a fire in an old hearth. River had been tending to Gristui, who had staggered to the ruined settlement mid-afternoon before dropping into a heap on a cushion of brush and falling dead asleep. And Seth, well, since arriving at Ironstead with a rucksack half full of supplies, he'd sulked off to the edge of the settlement where he leaned against a low wall and stared sullenly into the forest. Jace shook his head while thinking of the youth. Eventually, someone would have to talk to him about helping out the group. That someone would probably be Jace. But for now, they had more pressing issues. Jace laid the stone napper's kit into an empty fireplace beside a lantern, missing wick, and two ceramic pots of lamp oil, then ran his eyes over his other finds from the treasure hunting mission. So far, the haul included a jewel crafter's kit, basic, This, he figured, should go to Mackenzie. Quite a few ceramic pots and bowls, an iron skillet and iron soup kettle, blacksmith's tongs, and the heads of a pitchfork and a hoe. Satisfied with his acquisitions so far, he stepped away from the cache. He started toward the shelter, intending to join the group for the night, but another treasure glow captured his interest. It was almost invisible beneath the spreading branches of an evergreen shrub, but when he pushed the branches out of the way, the cracks around a foundation stone glowed brightly. Jace pulled the pry bar from his belt and slotted it into one of the gaps. A message appeared. "You sense danger below. For one of such basic competencies, you certainly seem interested in rushing headlong into situations you certainly can't handle. Maybe level up a bit first?" Okay. Jace slowly withdrew the pry bar and stood. After some thought, he also grabbed a few fallen blocks from the nearest wall and piled them atop the loose flagstone. He'd already planned to establish a watch rotation within the group until they had some semblance of walls as protection. This apparent danger only strengthened that instinct. Tomorrow, they could check out the other cellar where the message had claimed he lacked the skill to find the treasure. Seemed to him the best course would be to get that opening closed for the time being, too. But for now, the sight of the warm glow from the fire pulled his feet toward the group. Snatching the jewel crafter's kit, might as well give it to Mackenzie straight up before anyone else could lay claim. He headed for the shelter. Chapter 14. Sitting on the edge of the stone hearth, Mackenzie watched the flames dance within the fireplace. Contained and channeled by the stone, the heat was stronger than the warmth from their previous campfires, enough that she was already starting to feel sleepy, even though it wasn't fully dark.
I imagine we'll want to harvest some trees and chop them to get the wood drying,
Jace said as he stepped over a low area in the surrounding walls and approached the fire.
We'd run out of driftwood eventually, but I think it's better if we don't pick the beach clean. We're fairly well hidden up here, considering the extent of the ruins. Don't want to leave too many signs of our presence.
That was a good idea. They didn't know much about their surroundings or the potential enemies nearby. But chances were high there were more slavers around. And given what River and Seth had overheard from their captors, there was some sort of general unrest or conflict going on. Things their small group would definitely want to stay clear of. "I was also thinking we should try to keep the fire burning low through the day," she said. "We'll probably want it for cooking anyway, but until I find more thistledown, I don't want to run through my shaman's matches."
Sounds like a plan,
Jace said, laying a folded piece of what appeared to be supple leather on the hearth beside her.
A warm spot to dry laundry tomorrow sounds fantastic. As grateful as I am that none of you have said anything about my reek, don't think I haven't noticed. Looking forward to washing out these rags.
Mackenzie laughed and turned to hide the blush in her cheeks when the image of Jace sitting around naked while his clothes dried sprang to mind. She picked up the folded leather. "What's this?" "You have received Jewel Crafter's Kit. Basic. Contains tools and supplies for the creating of basic charms and jewelry." "Holy! Awesome! Thank you!" Jace glanced over at River as if feeling a little guilty for playing favorites.
Figured you already have a jump on us when it comes to creating trinkets.
Mackenzie felt the grin on her face as she pulled the kit onto her lap. She immediately wanted to sort through it, but one of the cobble roots that she'd laid over the coals was starting to smolder. Besides, the light from the fire wasn't all that strong. If there were small components folded up with the kit, she didn't want to lose any. "Thanks," she said, then turned to River, who was sitting beside Gristwee. The skulk had recently awakened, and now he was partially upright, shoulders leaned against one of the foundation walls. Unfortunately for everyone else, he sat with his legs splayed and his tank-top tunic hiked most of the way up his scrawny thighs. Mackenzie kept her eyes carefully averted. She did not want to learn whether skulks wore underpants. "Want to pull this round out of the fire, River?" The girl nodded and jumped up. She licked her fingers and grabbed the stalks of the cobble roots, tugging them out of the coals one by one. A small smile of satisfaction curled her lips.
Cooking skill is up to 2.
Jace raised an eyebrow.
Good thinking.
Mackenzie shrugged, feeling a little self-conscious at the praise. The skill-up curve seems pretty standard. You can only gain so many points from doing easy stuff, and the closer you get to the limit for a particular action, the slower the points come. I'm already up to 6 cooking, so not really getting anything from the recipes we know. Once the roots had cooled, River carried one to Gristui. The skulk looked at it for a moment, then shook his head and said something in his hiss-wheeze language. With long fingers, he started digging in the soil beside his hip, and soon pulled out a wriggling earthworm. The skulk popped it into his mouth and appeared to swallow the creature whole. River remained frozen, and then Jace chuckled. The skulk stared at the man for a long couple of seconds before breaking out in a wide grin and squealing in his version of laughter.
How's everyone's skulk language skill coming?
He asked. Mackenzie blinked in surprise. They had a language skill?
6 points.
River said with a shy smile.
4 here.
Both of them looked at Mackenzie. Guess I need to spend more time with him, she said.
Well,
Jace said, turning back to River.
Keep at it.
He focused on Gristui with his next words.
I'm glad you're here. Be patient with us. I'm eager to learn what you can tell us about the area.
Mackenzie thought she spied a flicker of concern when he spoke the last words, but maybe that was just her imagination. Over the following hour or so, the group settled in around the fire. Even Seth came shuffling in with a glower on his face to snatch a pair of roasted roots and pout. As the flames crackled, they laid plans for the following days and set a watch rotation for the night hours. Even though Jace had been given leadership of the settlement, Mackenzie ignored the little pang of envy. He listened to everyone's suggestions and offered his own without the expectation that everyone would agree. When the first yawns started to spread through the group, Mackenzie selected the biggest driftwood logs and a few of the green branches left over after covering the rough planks of the shelter's roof. She banked the fire, watching sparks swirl up into the night sky, then shuffled across the uneven ground inside the foundation to find a spot beneath the shelter's overhang. Soon enough, River and Seth joined her, followed by Gristui, who edged shyly into the area beneath the roof.
Sleep well, friends,
Jace said.
I've got first watch.
The next thing Mackenzie knew, she was being gently shaken awake by River for her pre-dawn watch. Chapter 15. You have gained a skill point. +1 stone napping. Jace whooped when a flake of the chert nodule he'd been striking for the past hour fractured and flew away in the way he'd intended, sharpening the edge he'd been trying to hone. Sure, the nodule was useless at this point, having been whittled down to nearly nothing by his clumsy efforts. But the next one might actually turn into something. Congratulations! You have earned a title. Caveman. While most of the world is well into the Iron Age, here you are, making stone tools. But whatever, at least you're doing something useful. His knuckles ached from holding the hammerstone for so long. Standing, Jace shook the chips from the leather patch he'd been using to protect his lap while banging rocks together. He rolled the stone napper's kit back together and returned it to the shelter of the empty fireplace, then paused and considered what to do next. The previous few days had passed in a rhythm of work and rest. Initially, the group had set out to establish a more permanent shelter, but they'd quickly run into issues. Though there was plenty of stone around, they didn't have any mortar, and the 7 rough planks they'd scavenged from the caravan were scarcely enough roof to sleep comfortably beneath, much less build secure walls. So, the decision had been made to stick with the temporary shelter while they gathered resources. First, they'd collected deadfall, choosing straight logs as potential walls for the structure. When the nearby forest had been scoured clean of easily gathered wood, River had switched her focus back to advancing her healing skills and communicating with Gristui. Mackenzie had returned to her crafting efforts, and Jace had started chopping down mid-sized trees with the hatchet they'd scored from the caravan. He'd gained a couple of skill points in one-handed axes and another pair in lumberjacking, but the little axe didn't have much swing weight, so it took forever to bite through even the mid-sized trees. The stone knapping was a side project to address that shortcoming by producing an axe head with more heft, but he didn't want to spend too much time on it since the shelter was a more pressing issue. He headed for the supply cache that was growing to fill much of the central cobblestone area and looked over the results of their efforts. According to the information provided by Settlement Interface, that was another thing he'd grown accustomed to, summoning interface screens with mental gestures. They now had 27 logs. By his best estimate, that would be enough, when notched and stacked, to create walls maybe to chest height. If they could figure out how to build up an existing structure, that would raise the height closer to his shoulders or chin. His gaze wandered over to Seth, who he had tasked with stripping the bark from the logs, starting with the easier deadfall. Not only would it make the building easier, but according to River, the bark had another use. Bark tanning was part of one of the methods for curing animal skins into leather. It sounded a lot more pleasant than brain tanning, which involved mashing up the creature's gray matter and working it into the hide. So Jace was all for the bark method.
Any skill ups?
He asked when Seth looked up. The teen snarled.
Stupid game thinks it's funny. Yeah, 1 point in lumberjacking. But after that, I got manual labor twice and a point in sulking.
Jace had to try really hard not to laugh.
That's a slight improvement over the points you guys earned in being imprisoned, right?
Seth just rolled his eyes. Jace made a fist behind his back, a trick he often used to keep a friendly face when he'd been forced to ask national park visitors to please use the trash cans rather than the forest to dispose of their Cheetos bags.
So, I've been thinking we should divide up some of the group gear. Better to go around armed and armored in case of an attack, don't you think? Probably should have done it before.
The truth was, Jace had felt a strange reluctance to give the kid a weapon, which had bled over into a decision to procrastinate handing out the leather armor and supplies they'd looted from the caravan. He couldn't explain the gut feeling, but it just didn't sit right with him to have the angry teen wielding. Thinking about it, though, he couldn't pick out a particular reason for the reluctance. Seth might be a jerk, but he'd been helping out when asked. Certainly, Jace would rather have the teenager be an asset than a liability in the event of a slaver or bandit attack. Or, more likely, if they encountered whatever danger lurked below the town. On the first morning in Ironstead, Jace had managed to communicate well enough with Gristui to determine that the threat wasn't from subterranean skulk tunnels. As for what it was, no one seemed to have a guess. Mackenzie and Seth, as the gaming experts in the group, had suggested that it was probably something called a newbie dungeon and that once they'd geared up and gained a couple of levels, they should head down and try to clear out the threat. In the meantime, the group had spent a few hours covering each cellar opening with logs weighed down with enough stone blocks that it would take ungodly strength for something to escape. Or so they hoped, anyway.
Duh,
Seth said.
Of course we should split the loot.
Jace squeezed his hidden fist tighter.
Anything you're interested in? The leather vest is too small for me. Or you could take one of the woolen jackets if you prefer warmth over armor.
The hardened leather vest definitely had the best stats, adding 10 armor. Jace would rather one of the women take it, but if the gesture could bring Seth out of his sullen funk, it would be worth it. The kid shook his head.
Not what I'm thinking for my character build.
Oh? I didn't know you already had a class in mind.
Yeah, well, no one's bothered to ask much about what I want. Anyway, I'm thinking some kind of caster. Clothy.
Cool. You have any magic or abilities we haven't heard about?
Jace almost smiled. A couple of weeks ago, He never would have imagined he'd be asking that kind of question as if it were totally natural. Seth's face darkened as he shook his head.
But I'm working on some things.
Beyond the stack of logs where the kid was laboring, the other supplies from the caravan were tucked beneath a lean-to that kept off most of the frequent drizzle. Jace strode over and chewed his lip. If the teen wasn't interested in armor, what did that leave?
"Wanna take turns with me on the rusty knife?"
He asked.
"I've been using some of the trees as training dummies. Figure my go-to weapons in a fight would be the hammer and hatchet, though."
Seth just snorted.
Dude, man. I'm not really in the mood for making friends, okay? I'll take a rucksack so I have something to carry my shit around in. Otherwise, this stuff is just junk.
Okay, then. Jace sighed as he pulled out the caravan lockbox and jiggled the padlock that still fastened the hasp. On the first day, he and Mackenzie had used a pair of pins from her jewelry kit in some failed attempts to pick the lock. The game meant it when it said that a skill value of 0 wasn't enough to pick a lock that required 23 points. In the back of his mind, Jace had hoped to have some opportunities to raise his skill, but nothing had presented itself, so might as well get on with opening the lock in another way. He grabbed the pry bar from the supply cache and laid it against the hasp like a chisel. When he raised his hammer to strike, he heard a hiss-wheeze of protest. Gristwee came racing over and plucked the hammer from his hand. Jace stared at the skulk, not sure what to say.
Me open, dude!
Gristwee said. Over the past few days, the skulk's language had become more and more intelligible as Jace skilled up. At the same time, Gristwee's understanding of what Jace and the others said seemed to have improved. But unlike the bit of foreign language learning he'd done back home, he didn't seem to be learning skulk words. The game just seemed to be translating based on Jace's skill level. A convenient solution, since it would have been a lot harder to learn to interpret the squeals and hisses and clicks. Gristwee flexed and straightened his newly healed arm, the bandages having just come off the evening before. Jace stepped back in surprise when he, from some hidden pocket in his tunic, produced what appeared to be a real set of lockpicks. The skulk smirked and rolled his eyes as if it shouldn't have been a surprise.
"Rogue,"
Gristwee said, jabbing a thumb toward his chest.
"Level 5. He's a damn rogue,"
Jace repeated to himself, remembering that they were the thieves and assassins of the gaming world. Why hadn't anyone in the group thought to ask whether the skulk had any sort of combat abilities? He'd clearly had enough skill to get free when the wolves ripped him from the cage. Gristwee fiddled with the locks for a few seconds, working the picks and cocking his head in concentration until with a thunk, the body of the padlock fell free. The skulk grinned as he lifted the hasp and opened the lockbox. A pop-up sprang into Jace's vision. Contents: Rhymeshore map. Sketched in rough detail. Shows the major landmarks of the Rhymeshore region and the approximate locations of borders with adjacent lands. Ritualist's dagger. This steel dagger has been crafted by a skilled weaponsmith. The jewels in the guard appear to be ornamental, but it's possible that in the right hands, they might imbue focus item properties to the blade. 8 to 9 piercing damage, 52 out of 52 durability. Grass King's token. This bronze disc, stamped with the sigil of the 19th Grass King, is used by agents of the throne as identification and proof that work is being done for their liege. Scroll. Ward sight. Upon use, grants a major concealment bonus to all objects and people within a 50-pace radius. Coin. 3 gold, full weights. 20 silver pieces. 12 copper bits. Jace heard a sharp intake of breath and the rush of footsteps as Seth approached. The teen jabbed a hand into the lockbox and yanked out the dagger. He cradled the hilt in one hand, the blade in the other, and stared down at the weapon, nodding.
Now, this is what I meant about gear that's right for my character.
Jace leaned closer, examining the blade. For all their rough appearance, someone in the slaver party had treated the weapon well, keeping the steel of the blade oiled. Black leather wrapped the hilt, showing no signs of having dried with age. Set into the guard, 6 dark gems, garnets maybe, winked in the diffused sunlight that filtered through the cloud cover. At either end of the guard, ivory carvings of open-mouthed faces had been attached. A faint yellowing in the hollows of the faces was the weapon's only sign of age. Gristouille was staring at something in the box, his waxy-skinned cheek twitching. Slowly, he reached in and plucked out the bronze disc bearing the symbol of the Grass King. His fingers went even whiter when he pinched it hard. Jace glanced back and forth between the pair. He'd just been trying to build some rapport with Seth by offering him gear, and this seemed to be a good opportunity for that. But the dagger was by far the best weapon they'd found. Should it really go to someone who spent half his time off who knows where, wallowing in self-pity? As for Gristouille, there was clearly a lot to his story. Jace got the feeling the relationship with the Grass King's agents hadn't begun when the skulk had been captured and tossed in the cage. He took a breath and turned to Seth first.
Listen, man. If you think that's the right weapon for you, take it. But I've got to be able to justify giving it to you when the others ask. So, do me a favor, okay? We need you to start sticking with the group a little more. We're all in this together, okay?
He expected a scowl or complaint, but for once, Seth just nodded. The dagger had been resting on a leather sheath that appeared to fit the blade.
Got it.
The teen said as he reached for the sheath.
Stick around more. Do whatever projects you guys seem to think are important. Whatever. Sounds good.
Well, that wasn't the best response Jace could have hoped for, but he probably wasn't going to get any further with the kid just then. As Seth shuffled off, untying his belt so that he could run it through the loops on the sheath, Jace picked up the map and unrolled it as he watched Gristouille's face. The skin around the skulk's large eyes was tight with emotional pain.
I'm guessing you weren't the first of your kind to be captured by the Grass King's slavers,
he said as he shifted his gaze to the map. The drawing depicted a complicated coastline stretching roughly north to south, bounded to the east by an island-studded sea, and to the west by a ridge of mountains labeled as the Cragscale Mountains. Just beyond the mountains, what appeared to be a wide plain bore a marking: Grass Kingdom. In the far north, a short ridge of peaks stood between the coastal region and a large ice field. To the south, the coastline became even more intricate, myriad bays and channels cutting the land to bits just above the bottom of the map. Gristouille dragged his eyes from the bronze token and looked at the map. He jabbed a stiff finger into the plain beyond the mountain.
Grass King takes many skulks. I'm sorry,
Jace said, glancing up and noticing the approach of River and Mackenzie.
Has it been going on for long?
The skulk responded in a series of wheezes and squeaks, most of which Jace couldn't decipher. He caught the word brother, but otherwise was stumped. River, however, seemed to understand, because her eyebrows steepled in sympathy.
Poor guy,
She said.
His brother was captured at the start of spring when the skulks gather grubs for their... He called them ranches. I guess they must raise insects for eating. Before this, his band has always avoided capture by going underground during the usual season for slaver activity. But the Grass King's agents came early this year. The passes aren't even open through the mountains yet, so Gristouille's people think the slavers must have established a winter camp on this side of the mountains. They think the captives are being held there until enough snow melts that the mountains can be crossed.
Jace looked down at the little guy, who was once again hissing and wheezing at River.
I'm following you so far, but Gristouille was the only skulk prisoner in the caravan once you were captured, right? What happened to the others?
They were captured earlier, actually. His brother was a part of the grub foraging party. He's the only family Gristouille has. After the foragers were taken, the tribe's council sent scouts to try to attack the caravans. But the winter's breath was especially strong last year, and they were attacked first by a winter-touched lynx, and then a mother bear and her touched cubs. One skulk woman died in the second fight, and the scouts retreated. The council decided to protect those who remained rather than try to mount a rescue for captives they might never find.
The young woman listened some more, nodding as Grizdwi rattled off an explanation that ended in a long sigh and slumped shoulders.
He said he couldn't just give up on his brother, but he knew that he would never find the slaver camp alone, especially with so many winter-touched beasts roaming. So he did the only thing he could think of. He headed out to the main road and made a visible camp near enough to the track that he could be spotted when the wrong people came by. The slavers captured him around 5 weeks ago and made a slow journey down the coast. The touched creatures gave them plenty of trouble, which is why Seth and I were the only other captives after all that traveling. You pretty much know the rest. He thinks the caravan had to be drawing near the turnoff to the winter camp, but he can't know for certain. All he does know is that he won't go home without freeing his brother.
Grizdwi turned his big eyes up at the circle of humans listening to the story.
You help, dudes?
He asked. Grizdwi is offering you a quest. Before the Snow Melts, Part 1. The passes through the Cragscale Mountains are still frozen, meaning that any slaves captured by the Grass King's agents must be being held somewhere near the Rhymeshore coast. There is still a chance to free Grizdwi's brother before the caravans leave for the Grass Kingdom, where the slaves will be put to work in service of the Tyrant King. Objective: locate the slaver camp. Reward: plus 200 esteem with Grizdwi, plus 50 esteem with Skulk Race. 800 experience. Accept? Yes or no? Jace clicked yes before meeting the eyes of his companions. One by one, he saw them nod, even Seth, though something in the kid's eyes suggested his support for the mission was more selfish than altruistic. He was probably imagining finding more items like the ritualist's dagger. Either way, they would need everyone's strength for this mission, even that of a sullen kid with dark wizard aspirations. Jace shaded his eyes and peered over the treetops to where the icy crest of the Cragscales cut sharp lines from the sky. Now that he knew that summer brought a thaw to the high peaks, he noticed a few rocky ribs peeking out. Before, he remembered seeing nothing but snow and ice. Based on his experience with the summer melt in the mountains back home, he guessed they had at least another month, probably more than 2, before the passes would be navigable.
All right then,
He said.
If we're going to be successful in finding this camp and rescuing Grizdwi's people, we still need a solid base camp. As long as we're still shivering through each night and scrounging just enough food to eat, we won't be in any condition to pull off the rescue. So, I say we redouble our efforts to finish the shelter.
He glanced at River.
I noticed you clearing stones from an area near the edge of the ruins. Planning a garden?
The girl nodded.
I was thinking of it as a small farm plot. I thought I could transplant a few of the healing herbs and maybe try growing cobble roots from seed.
Good. Keep at it. And I'll work on my fishing when I'm too tired for chopping down trees. We'll want to figure out better clothing, armor, bedrolls. In that regard, I think our best bet is to set some snares and try to get both meat and hide for leather.
At this, Mackenzie grimaced. Yeah, about the leather. Before we snare anything, we should make sure River has explained this whole bark tanning method. Unfortunately, it seems we should have dealt with the Timberwolf alpha pelt a lot sooner. Got so smelly and stiff that I had to carry it down to the water and let the waves have it. Jace nodded.
Shame. But I guess we learned something. Next time, the hide goes straight into the bark water, right? Isn't that what you said we needed to do?
River gave him a smile that made him think of a parent humoring their child.
Actually, we'll need to start with scraping every bit of flesh off the inside of the skin. Then, if we want to get rid of the hair, we'll have to rub the fur side with wet ash. Maybe ash and urine. I don't remember for sure. Somewhere in there, we need to work tallow into the flesh, and it takes a lot of elbow grease to muscle it into the skin. Plus, there's added work to break down the grain.
Oh, Mackenzie said with her lip curled. Sounds fun?
Brain mush tanning has fewer steps, I think.
River said.
But
I think we can stick with the bark.
Jace cut in. The young woman smirked.
anyway, hopefully the process will get easier when we skill up. I know it's gotten easier for me to make root mash, and it's not because I'm doing much differently. It's like the system actually abstracts some of the mundane tasks easier after we gain cement the skill.
Then it sounds like we probably just need one lucky volunteer to double down on the tanning.
Jace said.
Anyone want to jump on that?
When no one said anything, he laughed.
I guess we'll have to draw straws when the time comes.
Chapter 16. Exploring inland, the group found an overgrown cart track that cut through the forest to connect with the coastal road. Around a half-mile of woodland separated Ironstead and the road, enough to grant some privacy, but the closeness meant they still needed to be cautious. On the inland rim of the settlement's small bluff, River and Seth wove added branches into the screen of trees to further cloak the site, gaining a point each in fortifications. Bolstering the concealment, Mackenzie, Gristwee, and Jace dragged a few more logs across the cart track, carefully brushing away any tracks they left in the process. A couple of days after that was finished, the new shelter finally went up, logs notched and stacked inside the footprint of one of the ruined buildings. Everyone pitched in to chink the gaps with mud mixed with straw. The humble structure even had a peaked roof to shed rain, the rafters supporting a hodgepodge of rough planks from the caravan and makeshift thatch of evergreen branches. Jace proved to be the quickest at gaining skill in basic construction, despite Mackenzie's early lead. But everyone ended the cabin-building process with over 5 points. The completion also granted a chunk of experience to the group, enough that Seth and River both got level 3. Inside the cabin, the group cleared the floor of rubble and then smoothed the area by laying down flagstones gathered from around the ruins. From there, they brought fresh branches of a springy sort of evergreen bush that served to keep sleeping bodies off the cold ground. It wasn't the Hilton, but with a proper roof and flat surface beneath, everyone started sleeping better, waking with their fatigue score reduced to nearly 0 for the first time since arriving in the new world. Because the cabin was built inside the crumbling walls of an older stone building, the system granted an additional defense bonus against cold and wind. On top of that, the door opened near the hearth and fireplace, allowing some heat from the banked flames to pass into the shelter. Of course, it wasn't a spot that anyone would want to hang out at. Aside from areas where the mud hadn't completely sealed the gaps between logs, the only light in the simple shelter came in through the door. Some debate went into whether or how to create a door that could close. The canvas patch kit from the caravan included a swatch of canvas large enough to be pegged in place and cover the opening, but after consideration, they decided to use the heavy cloth to reinforce areas of their increasingly threadbare clothing instead. Mackenzie earned 2 points in tailoring while stitching patches over the knees and elbows of their garments, and the reinforcements granted 3 armor points for everyone. For now, the door remained open. The day after the final bit of thatch was laid over the roof of the cabin, Mackenzie was constructing a simple smoker to preserve the fish Jace was catching when she heard River shout. Rushing across the settlement, she found the girl on hands and knees, staring down at something in the dirt. Mackenzie dropped down and finally spotted a tiny little sprout that had poked its head through the dark loam.
I found a patch of what looked like dried wheat a while ago,
River explained.
A few of the stalks still had seeds. I didn't honestly think it would grow, but I had to try.
So we're looking at a wheatgrass sprout, you're saying? Like the stuff that health freaks like to turn into juice? River smirked.
My parents would probably fight each other for the chance to taste test. I'm kinda thinking of giving it a go, though. I know we like to have Jace test stuff since he gained that unusually resilient gut ability.
Mackenzie laughed. We could all have it if we volunteered to taste test unidentified mushrooms. Long as we don't mind the aftermath. He's lucky you discovered the purge weed, or he might still have abdominal cramps.
If by lucky you mean it was better to barf for a couple of hours than continue on like he was.
The lesser evil, I guess. River smiled.
Anyway, it turns out neither of the seeds was actually wheat, as far as I can tell. The game gives me 75% confidence that I found wild rye and coastal oats.
All of a sudden, Mackenzie started salivating. So you're serious? Does that mean...
Bread? Porridge? Something besides cobble root various fish and the leftover pemmican from the caravan? I think so. I think we might even be able to tolerate eating more puckerberries if they're baked into something.
Mackenzie could have hugged the girl if she wasn't afraid she'd stumble and crush one of the delicate sprouts. Now if you could get me some coffee? Drip would work. Doesn't even have to be a latte or anything. If you could do that, I think I might actually survive this. A crooked grin tugged at the corner of the young woman's mouth.
Let's see if this stuff grows first.
The sight of fur stopped Mackenzie in her tracks. For the last 5 days, she'd been setting snares with loops cut from their small supply of leather cord. She'd scouted what she believed to be the best game trails, but so far, no animals had been caught. Until now, apparently. She swallowed. In truth, she wasn't looking forward to this. Eating meat was fine and good, but it was going to be a struggle for her to do the killing part, especially when the prey was a trapped and helpless small animal. But she gripped her newly modified weapon, a really sucky spear, plus 5% hit chance versus non-flying creatures, formed by sharpening and hardening the point of Jace's original staff and fastening one of her stone bond charms around it for the bonus. As long as she thought of this in gaming terms, she'd probably hunted more than 1,000 small mammals in various MMOs over the years. She figured she could bring herself to do the deed. Turned out, the creature was already dead. As Mackenzie approached, she kept a tight grip on her spear, ready to pounce and impale the animal when it panicked at her approach. She even gave a little battle cry and dashed forward to cover the final distance, but the snared hunk of fur just lay there limply, eyes closed. The snare had captured the animal around the neck, but it hadn't cinched so tight as to strangle it. Seemed that the system figured the successful trap was a good enough effort to win the encounter. You have gained a skill point. Snares and traps. Crouching, she examined the catch. Squeezle, winter-touched. Ordinarily shy and living below ground, squeezles enjoy tunnels. Wouldn't you if you were 20 times longer than you were tall? During more civilized eras in Rhymeshore's history, the head cook at the ruling fortress, Grey Mist Hold, was known to keep a family of squeezles as pets and mousers for the kitchen. This creature has been affected by winter's breath. Health. Dead. Duh. Would you like to skin the creature before activating the looting process? Yes or no? Finally, the chance to make some leather or furs. Mackenzie selected yes without hesitation, and then pulled the group's skinning knife from her belt pouch. As she slit the creature's chest and belly, she noticed abnormally long fangs extending from its mouth. Halting the skinning for a moment, she pinched one of the teeth between her thumb and forefinger. Even though the creature's head was no bigger than a ping-pong ball, the fang was as long as her thumbnail was wide. Given what they'd heard of the dangers of these winter-touched creatures, she would have been willing to wager that the teeth weren't natural. You have received a quest. You've got to be wondering by now. You keep running into and hearing about this winter's breath thing. Seeing as you appear to be stuck here, maybe it would be a good idea to develop a little more active curiosity about your surroundings. Objective: find out what winter's breath actually is. Reward: probably more work, 'cause it seems likely you'll want to take measures once you know what you're dealing with. But you might also get some experience. Except, Yes or no? Mackenzie had a policy of never turning down quests, even if it meant she had to purge her quest log now and again when she out-leveled something. She quickly accepted the quest and continued with the skinning. It was easier than when she'd removed the pelt from the Timberwolf alpha, the hide peeling away from the carcass with little coaxing. As soon as it was free, the remainder of the animal disintegrated into loot. You receive squeezle pelt, fair. Good for making very long and thin pieces of leather. Try not to let this one rot. You receive squeezle meat, 3. Fairly stringy when cooked. Squeezle meat isn't exactly prized among wilderness gourmands, but it's protein, right? She smirked. Well, seemed it was time to get on with this whole tanning thing. Chapter 17. The group huddled around the trapdoor leading to the cellar and stared down, their weapons drawn and gripped tightly. For Jace, that meant hefting the blacksmith's hammer in one hand and the rusty knife in the other. Over the past few days, his skill advancement from fighting against tree trunks had ground to a halt, which meant he probably needed real enemies to make more progress toward the Tier 2 skill ratings he needed for his weapon seeker quest. Mackenzie stood beside him, hands wrapped around her spear. A couple of days ago, he'd gained enough skill in stone knapping to fashion her a real point for her weapon. Set into a deep slot in the wood, the chert blade was bound to the shaft with strips of rawhide that had shrunk as they dried. A pair of bangles were attached to the spear in a similar manner. The stone bond charm added accuracy against non-flying creatures. Mackenzie's newest crafting recipe, Hawk's Token, composed of a hawk feather, leather cord, and a small pebble with a natural hole in it, was listed as having an unknown effect.
Sorry we don't have a real iron point for that,
he said, glancing at her spear. Her mouth twisted up in a kind of charming way. This is going to sound dumb, since human history pretty much established the superiority of metal tools over their stone counterparts, but it feels right for my character. I kind of get a nails-on-chalkboard feeling when I think of wielding metal. Well, at least that meant she'd always have a use for his caveman skills. Jace glanced at Gristui, who seemed the least nervous of the party. Rightfully so, since he was level 5 and the most likely to survive if things went wrong. The little guy seemed to sense Jace's attention and looked up. Much to everyone's shock, the Skulk had recently produced a pair of small knives from hidden pockets in his oversized tank top, and now the blades glittered in the morning sun. He brandished them and gave a little snarl.
Dude, bro, we should just get on with this,
the Skulk said. Jace avoided rolling his eyes. A couple of days ago, Mackenzie had discovered that they could spend their social currency points to gain skill in Skulk language. Jace was almost to Tier 3 now, and he was trying not to regret it, having heard things called far out and gnarly a few too many times since.
Yeah, okay. Hold your horses a second.
He glanced at River.
Ready?
River fiddled with the pouch on her belt where she kept her newest herb mashes in small clay pots. For a weapon, she carried the worst among the group, a tomahawk sort of thing comprised of a sharpish stone lashed to a thick stick with more raw hide. But she also had the best armor, the hardened leather vest. Everyone else had at least one bracer, and Mackenzie had sewn some shoulder guards for herself with the squeezle leather and sinew thread she'd been creating.
Good to go,
the healer said. With a nod, Jace shoved the last heavy block off the square-cut flagstone that served as a trapdoor, then pulled the pry bar from his waistband and slotted it into the gap between the stone and the rest of the floor. The trapdoor lifted free with a grating sound. Mossy dirt dribbled from the edges as he dropped the tool, worked his fingers into the gap, and heaved. You gain an attribute point. +1 strength. A set of stone stairs led down into the dimness, ending on a limestone floor that appeared to be at least partially natural. The existence of caves shouldn't have been a huge surprise for Jace after his early work stint at Carlsbad Caverns National Park. Almost every notable cave system on Earth had been created by water-dissolving limestone over thousands of years. Still, he hadn't really thought about the possibility of an extensive set of chambers beneath Ironstead. It could be good. Couldn't hurt to have a hidden retreat in the event the slavers came. But given the warnings from the system, it might also mean they were too optimistic about their chances of clearing out the danger. Regardless, they needed this chance to test their skills and gain experience if they were going to rescue Gristwee's brother. Or rather, his bro, as the translation now called the captured skulk. Jace nodded at Seth. The teen held up their lantern, which had gained a rolled canvas wick left over from Mackenzie's reinforcements to their clothing.
After you,
Seth said. The steps were smooth under Jace's feet, almost slick where they'd been polished by long-ago foot traffic. As he descended, the air grew increasingly damp. His eyes strained against the darkness until Seth had joined him on the cellar floor and raised the lantern higher. Light danced along the walls, revealing the remnants of wooden shelves, largely crumbled to soggy splinters. An overturned piece of pottery in the corner glowed dully under Jace's treasure sense. He walked over and examined it, footsteps echoing off the walls and down a passage that opened opposite the stairs. Item: butter churn. Combines a ridiculous amount of effort with cream to create butter. Have fun! The churn seemed to be missing the plunger part that Jace remembered seeing in museums, the stick, paddle that performed the churning of the cream. But that would be easily replaced. It could be pretty nice to be able to make butter. Provided they had a cow. Which they didn't. Anyway, he didn't see the point in carrying a big piece of pottery around, so he left it in place for now and started edging for the narrow corridor. "Marching order!" Mackenzie called out. Quick footsteps answered the woman's command, and torchlight flared down the tunnel as Seth took up position behind Jace. Jace didn't have to look behind him to know that River would be sandwiched in the middle, with Mackenzie and Gristwee guarding the rear. When Jace stepped into the corridor, the sudden animal stench hit him like a wall. He gagged and stumbled. The smell was truly revolting. The closest scent he could recall was the god-awful smell of the sea cliff where thousands of birds nested. You have discovered Sea Grump Breeding Pit. Occasionally, an unwary fisherman mistakes a sea grump for a seal. They always regret it. You have been offered a quest. Stop the sea grump scourge. Okay, so maybe scourge is an overstatement. But just get rid of them, okay? Objective: clear out the sea grump nest. Reward: 1,000 experience. Reward: vial of nostril bleaching. Just kidding. You'll probably never get the stench out of your nose. Accept? Yes or no?
Oh, God!
Seth moaned.
Reeks!
Mackenzie made a little sound like she was throwing up inside her mouth, and River squeaked in dismay.
Totally heinous, dudes.
Gristwee muttered.
This can't be over soon enough.
Jace muttered. Stomach clenching, he advanced. The tunnel slowly descended, cutting through the limestone escarpment for perhaps 30 feet before briefly widening into an alcove on one side. In the small chamber, another set of crumbled shelves had spilled their contents onto the stone floor. Perhaps a dozen ceramic pots glowed under Jace's treasure sense. He noted them and moved on. More supplies to retrieve later. The walls began to seep near the end of the tunnel, making Jace think they'd dipped below sea level. He stopped a few feet before the corridor widened into an echoing chamber, eyes straining to make out detail in the cavern. Near the doorway, a few rounded humps caught the lantern light, wet surfaces shining. He glanced back at the group to verify that everyone was ready before advancing. Creeping forward, he focused on the nearest hump until he was close enough to use combat assessment. Sea grump egg, level 0. Easy to open, but do you want to? Wait, Mackenzie whispered. Let's not touch the egg just yet. Jace nodded.
Yeah, let's see if we can...
Bunch of cowards! Pulling!
Jace's eyes widened as Seth abruptly dashed forward and jammed his dagger into the nearest egg. As the shell parted, falling away in leathery flaps, the teen spun and dashed back to the group. Silence held for a moment, and then a series of tearing noises echoed through the cavern as more eggs fell open. A chorus of barks rose from the chamber, and the space was abruptly full of undulating shadows. "Goddamn Leroy!" Mackenzie snapped. "Don't you have ears? I said wait!" The kids snorted.
They're level 0. What else are we supposed to do? Stare them to death? Anyway, what kind of seal lays eggs? So lame.
They were level 0.
River whispered. Jace took a step back as the first of the creatures entered the tunnel, its black eyes shining in the light. He fired off another combat assessment. Sea grump whelp, level 2. Carnivores from birth, ravenous whelps have been known to eat their own mother if they hatch before consuming all the nutrition in their eggs. It's recommended that adventurers wishing to eradicate a nest provide the whelps with the sea mare's corpse before attempting to deal with the young. Health, 52 out of 52.
Bummer, dudes,
Gristwee commented. The whelp flopped forward, moving almost like a seal on a beach, but somehow much, much faster. As fast as a human could run, Jace estimated. In place of front fins, the creature had stumpy legs with twisted feet and wicked claws. Whiskers bristled on a muzzle that pulled back from some very sharp-looking teeth. The thing barked again.
Cover me, I guess,
Jace said, grimacing. He took a step forward and aimed a kick at the whelp's face. His boot connected with a crack, the impact traveling up his leg. The whelp's head whipped to the side, egg goo spattering the floor. It howled and flopped closer, moving more slowly. A mighty swing of Jace's hammer smacked the animal's skull, smashing its head against the floor. The beast went limp. You receive 25 experience. He let out a shaky breath.
Ooh. One down.
Only 30 or so to go,
River said. The whelps came on like a surging wave. Jace and his friends met them as best they could, striking with their crude weapons, with their feet, slaying a young sea grump for roughly every 2 steps they were forced to retreat. The narrowness of the corridor kept them from being surrounded. At least Seth hadn't decided to rush headlong into the cavern. But soon, Jace felt the open air behind him as the party backed up toward the wider alcove.
I'll hold them here as best I can.
He grunted.
You guys retreat across the alcove one at a time. We don't want to fight them where they can flank us.
A grump surged forward, snarling, sharp teeth glinting in the flickering lamplight. The thing's eyes were flat black discs that swallowed the light. Jace stomped on one of its forelegs, temporarily pinning the claw to the corridor floor. But the flashing teeth grazed his shin, tearing the thin cloth of his trousers. A sudden burning sensation spread from his ankle to knee, and a split second later, he felt the warm flow of blood entering his boot. You take 4 damage. You have been afflicted with bleeding, minor.
Hurry!
He hissed through gritted teeth. Behind, footsteps thudded against the stone floor as the first of his companions dashed across the wider alcove. Jace stabbed down with the rusty knife, the blade contacting the sea grump's flesh just behind the creature's skull. He felt rubbery resistance before the skin gave way, and the knife slid deep through blubber, glancing off the spine before crunching through something cartilaginous. The creature gurgled and gasped as black blood leaked from its throat where Jace's blade had burst free. Jace yanked, raising the grump from the floor until the pressure of his boot on its foreleg gave him enough resistance to free his knife. The length of steel came out black, and then the sea grump collapsed, its lifeblood flooding from the now empty slash in its throat. You receive 27 experience. Jace felt cooler air on his back as his companions edged away. A brush of something against the back of his knee startled him until he saw small hands reaching around his shin. He couldn't look away from the advancing sea grumps long enough to make eye contact with River to thank her as she smeared one of her herbal concoctions through the tears in his trousers, then quickly cinched a strip of scavenged cloth around his lower leg. Another sea grump undulated forward, forelegs scrabbling over the corpse of its broodmate, and Jace clobbered it with a heavy hammer strike.
Thank you,
he said.
Get yourself safe.
River's hands disappeared from his sight. Moments later, the lantern light moved off as Seth's quick footfalls crossed the alcove.
Whoa, dude. This is mega unpleasant. Totally gnarly.
Gristwee muttered as the skulk ducked under Jace's elbow and slipped a knife between the ribs of the grump that Jace had just hammered. The creature's bark faded to a squeak and then a wheezy exhalation as it died.
Totally not stupendous. Everyone else clear?
Jace hissed.
Yeah, bro. Time to bail.
With that, the rogue melted away, footfalls silent. A pair of grumps were crowding down the corridor before Jace, their lips drawn back, forelegs clawing the floor. Jace roared and kicked and swung his hammer in front of their eyes, aiming for a flinch rather than contact. The gambit worked. Both sea grumps jerked their heads back. It was the best opportunity he'd get, so Jace turned and sprinted full tilt across the alcove. His friends had already retreated another 15 paces or so along the corridor opposite, so when he reached the constriction, he kept running. Barks and howls filled the hallway. Jace's foot skidded on a patch of damp stone, and he nearly went down. The slurps and slaps as the sea grumps flopped their way forward drew closer. He neared the rear of the party, close on Gristwee's heels, and whirled. There were so many. Too many. The hammer felt heavy in Jace's fist. His knife hilt slipped and slid where his sweat ruined his grip. He swiped the back of his arm across his forehead to clear away a damp lock of hair that had fallen into his eyes, kicked out at the nearest grump, and felt his standing legs slip. A hand caught him behind the back, keeping him upright.
Keep it cool, bro.
Gristwee wheezed.
Exit's just behind us.
Yeah, but to get to the staircase, the party would need to cross an open chamber much larger than the previous alcove. Jace swallowed back a sick feeling, the stench of the grumps suddenly overwhelming. The realization struck that he might die here, on a foreign world, never even knowing why or how he'd been transported. With a roar, he lashed out, swinging the hammer in a mighty arc that smashed a sea grump in the face, knocking the head sideways and snapping the creature's neck. The body sailed to the side and hit the wall. Jace growled, baring his teeth, and advanced a step. He felt the blood hot in his veins, a sudden rush of anger so intense he felt his eyes blazing. State activated, Northblood rage, plus 10 strength, minus 50% dodge. You receive 26 experience.
Whoa. Dudes. He's got the Northblood!
Gristwee hissed.
Totally wicked. And, could be a problem.
The skulk appeared, once again, beneath Jace's elbow, darting out with a quick strike that stabbed a grump through its flat disc of an eye. The creature squealed and collapsed, and another experience notification flashed in Jace's vision. Distantly, he heard the shouts of his companions calling for him to retreat. Jace advanced another step, inhaled the stench of the grumps, and let the odor fuel his anger. An enemy lunged forward and sank teeth into his calf. Gristwee sprang and stabbed the beast in the ribs, releasing the bite. The pain registered, stoking Jace's rage to the explosion point. He struck with both weapons at once, swinging them in wild arcs.
Dude, I know it's hard, but you gotta chill out. Gotta take control, because otherwise the Northblood is gonna ride you straight to the dirt.
Gristwee edged out farther from the shelter of Jace's bulk. Knives flashed as the skulk struck light blows that kept the grumps back without doing massive damage. Jace blinked, the heat in his eyes and blood and chest making it so damn hard to think. "Jace!" Mackenzie's voice cut down the hallway, high and clear over the grunts and barks of the whelps. "We're at the cellar stairs! Let's get out of here!" He blinked again, trying to focus on her words.
Listen to the chick, bro! Look at these dudes! Think they can wallow up the stairs? Totally impractical, right?
An image penetrated Jace's thick rage, a vision of the party standing on the steps and stabbing weapons downward, largely safe from attack. At the thought, the anger cooled just enough for him to plan a retreat.
Get to the cellar opening.
He growled.
I'll meet you there. For real, dude? Because lying would be way whacked. Just go.
Gristouille melted away as Jace began taking reluctant steps backward. He kicked the grumps that got too close, the power in his legs sending them tumbling onto their companions. Soon, he felt the open air of the cellar. The tide of sea grumps surged, seeming to sense the opportunity to flank him. Once again, the skulk appeared seemingly out of nowhere.
We sprinting for it, bro?
Jace whipped his head around to check the status of the party. The others were indeed on the stairs, with River at the top and Mackenzie on the lowest step. Mackenzie had her spear gripped in both hands, the hawk's token dangling from between two of her tightly wrapped fingers. Her eyes were wide, lips pressed into a line. At least they'd be safe, whatever happened. The grumps might be able to climb the stairs, but not easily. They'd be sitting ducks. He nodded and smacked a grump across the muzzle, sending it flying.
You first.
The skulk hesitated, but then moved. A few seconds later, he heard jostling and a whispered complaint from River when the young woman was forced farther up the stairs and out of range where she could help. Jace gave a last look at the advancing horde of whelps and whirled, sprinting with every ounce of strength in his legs. Howls filled the chamber as the sea grumps poured into the room. He didn't understand what was happening until his elbow cracked the stone floor. His shoulder landed next with a meaty slap. His left side taking the brunt of the fall, because it was the left leg that had given out when he'd tried to run with the bite wound in his calf. He looked up, caught Mackenzie's eyes before the first of the grumps was on him, clawed forelegs tearing at his flesh. From high on the stairs, River screamed. Mackenzie closed her eyes. A split second of silence filled the chamber. And then, two loud pops echoed through the chamber, rattling the butter churn. Abruptly, ghostly blue light flared. The flash coalesced into flying shapes. Gasps shot from the stairs as a pair of translucent hawks appeared, flapping hard against the air of the cellar. The raptors shrieked and dove, raking at the grump attached to Jace's leg. Ghostly blue talons bit into the grump, wrenching it off him. The shock wore off a split second later, and Jace realized there was still a chance to reach the stairs. Scrambling to his feet, he clenched his jaw and, cautious with the weak leg, staggered for the stairs. Behind, he heard the whistling of air as the hawks maneuvered in the small room, the cries of pain from the grumps.
Holy shit.
Seth whispered.
You do that on purpose?
Jace caught Mackenzie's eye as he laid a boot on the first stair, causing the party to move higher. She looked as shocked as he felt by the sudden appearance. "I'm not sure," she muttered.
Well, dudes, maybe we can contemplate these developments later. How about you let my bro here ascend the stairs and get that leg fixed before he bites the big one?
The skulk's words brought Jace's situation home, and all at once the heat fled his blood. His knees buckled, and if not for Gristouille's quick support, he would have toppled back off the step. The others gasped and immediately pressed against the walls of the staircase to allow him past, offering hands to help him up. The fresh air outside the cellar was sweet in his nostrils as he collapsed on the ground outside. Immediately, River was by his side, examining his wounds. As he closed his eyes, relaxing into the earth, he heard the grunts and barks of continued battle below. Experience notifications began to flow past as the cool balm of River's magical heal and her medicinal salves spread comfort through his injured leg.
Still alive,
He thought, as his world faded to black. Chapter 18. Jace surveyed the collected loot from the cellar explorations, the mini-dungeons, as Mackenzie and Seth called them. After the first, nearly disastrous trip beneath the town, things had gone better. At the far edge of the square, hides from the sea grump whelps and mares, 3 brood pits worth, were piled in a heap, awaiting Mackenzie's discerning eye. The pelts stank, but not nearly as badly as the subterranean brood pits had. A good washing and the curing process would take care of the remaining scent. It even said so in the item description, leaving them with a ready supply of water-shedding hides and sturdy leather. At the group's feet, the rest of the retrieved items were sorted by utility. There were more ceramic pots and urns, a massive kettle that Mackenzie had already claimed for use in her tanning work, and a selection of iron implements, including an axe head that would polish up nicely and work well to replace the hatchet for serious woodcutting. But Jace's eye was most drawn to the small pile of iron bars that his treasure sense had detected behind a snug-fitting wall panel. It had taken some hard work with the crowbar to pry the hidden chamber open, but the tight fit and some extra pine pitch sealing had been worth it. Scarcely any damp had touched the bars, and only a few dots of rust marred their surfaces. He had an anvil, iron, and a hammer. Near the anvil, he'd discovered what appeared to be a stone furnace. All that was missing for a proper forge was the right fuel, a working bellows, and the skill to use the stuff. Pity about that last item.
Well, we're still alive,
River said, as she crouched down and plucked at his bandage to ensure it was still secure.
I hope we learned a lesson in the first cellar.
All eyes in the group turned to Seth, whose cheeks purpled.
It could have been any of you that screwed up the pull. We didn't know.
Actually, the rest of us were still talking about how to proceed when you ran in and almost got us killed,
River said with a glare. Jace took a deep breath. Things had gotten worse between the pair lately, and as the de facto leader, it fell on him to keep the peace. The problem was, he couldn't argue with River's point. The kid had been beyond reckless, turning what should have been a straightforward sea grump eradication into a near disaster. After clearing the mob of whelps in the first cellar, they'd carefully advanced down the tunnel to the brood pit where they'd found the sea grump mare. If they had just been patient enough to sneak forward and examine her, they would have learned the same information that had shown when using combat assessment on the hatched whelps. If the group killed the mare first, the hatched young would immediately head for her corpse to feed, hardly noticing the humans and skulk who waited with backstab-ready weapons. Not only that, the mare had been almost trivial to kill. She was as slow as her young were fast. "Shit happens," Mackenzie said, rescuing him from the need to respond. "But seriously, dude, we gotta work together better." The teen's lip twitched, and Jace couldn't help but notice how his fingers twitched toward the jeweled dagger stuck through his belt.
I'll tell you what we need to do. We need to stop dicking around here playing frontier survival or whatever. We don't know jack about what's out there, and we should.
You saw what was out there!
River snapped.
They put collars on our necks and loaded us into a wagon!
Seth rolled his eyes.
We were disoriented. No way in hell would I let those shitheads take me now.
Now the kid did grab the hilt of his dagger. For a moment, it looked to Jace like a strange shadow leaked from between the teenager's fingers, but it vanished quickly. Jace marked the sight as something to investigate. He needed to know what sort of strengths his companions had, but it didn't seem like a good time to subject the kid to an investigation. River snorted.
Right. You know, while most of us have been playing frontier survival, we've also been developing skills. What exactly have you gained over the last week or so? Given your lack of helpfulness on the chores, I'm guessing not a lot.
The young woman had remained crouched beside Jace's leg, and he leaned sideways to lay a cautioning hand on her shoulder.
Hey, I know that the first cellar was stressful for everyone. But you said it. We're still alive. Not only that, but we learned that these tunnels all end underwater. We don't have to worry about humans surprising us by coming up from the basements, and it will be easy to create some barricades to keep out more grumps.
Mackenzie seemed to catch on, and she stepped toward Seth as if offering a bit of solidarity. Jace is right. Everything worked out, and we learned a lot. And I've got to say, you don't make a bad point about getting to know our surroundings. We've got a map, and Gerstwi can help with navigating. What do you guys say we give me a couple of days to process the new leather? We'll probably need to patch or replace our clothes soon anyway. Then we can pack up for a bit of exploration." In response to her words, the anger seemed to drain from Seth's body. His hand fell away from his blade. Jace held Mackenzie's eyes for a moment, wondering, not for the first time, why the game had made him the camp leader. She cast him a quick wink before looking away. Jace made a mental note to thank her later.